So anyway, this is a scene of downtown Willow Grove. I called this. Did a simpler version of this at the Monroe at a show that we did at the Monroe show, the clinic there, splitting the duty between the legacy of the Swamp Creek, which was in Edmonds, to now our base in Everett. In over 50, the club is 50 years old as of this year. So, and we had a operating railroad for a long time, and it was getting a little long in the tooth because a lot of it was laid down in the 70s. I had relayed most of the trackage about 15 years ago. These are some of the cars from our member John Deneen, who's a big Milwaukee Road guy. And the club started in the Kaibar Hobby Shop. I don't know if you can see the mouse at all here, but basically in this corner back in 1974. John was also one of the charter members and is still very active as the club's treasurer. Then in 1978, moved to the Edmonds Freight Room, which is this is our door right here. This is basically from the chimney on over, was all the Swamp Creek and Western, named after Swamp Creek that runs in parts of Linwood and in southern Snohomish County. And it was a pretty happy home for a long time. We leased that space directly from the railroad, built a bay window in here and everything else. We had electrification, although we had taken it out by the time this picture came along, so the pans are down. But it was a semi-freelanced railroad, as the caption says, basically crossing the Cascades, as so many railroads did, from eastern to western Washington. In our case, ending at the Columbia River. So the Port Columbia in Eastern was actually sort of the club name of the freelanced railroad, but people would run what they brung, and obviously Northwest roads were well represented. uh SPNS, I've become a bit of an SPNS and NP fan in recent years. It's one of my engines. We did a sort of a final video rolling around once we sort of we knew that the end to this layout was coming true. A lot of logging operations, um, which were sort of a high line. There was a mining operation there that never quite got finished, and the new guy would usually get stuck with having to work on this. But we have changed a number of our policies and everything else. So, and I think we're going to do pretty well. OSHA rules were not around back in those days that we were representing back
Grandfathered
then.
into the new layout.
It's grandfathered into the new layout. That's a look up at some of the mining operations. Right there, a couple of work cars on that track. We had some really nice backdrops done by one of our late members, Clark Stemke. We had one large
Lay
tree,
down.
and but we're going to go to photo backdrops on the new layout, which will all be prototypical scenes. And unfortunately, all of this stuff is now in a dumpster. We were going to save a number of sections of it, but it ultimately really proved to be impractical to incorporate old layout pieces into a new layout that really is very prototypically focused. There's another shot of our mining operation from a higher level. And all of this ran. This also had catenary up there. Trolley water, really, to be picky about it. Some very tall scenery, some well done scenery. You can see more of those backdrops right there. This is on the upper part of the logging line. Clint Crow, C.C. Crow, this was one of his Mississippi Street towers that we adapted over for West Orchard, which is along the eastern wall of the space, kind of guarding the yard. This was one of the sections that we saved for a while and ultimately decided not to keep, called Coldwater. It was kind of the jumping off point for the logging line. And Mount Brinion was a pretty significant town on the railroad. So it was pretty well finished. when we got the word. And I was really sorry to see it go. Here's one of the kind of pocket tunnels that we had, not not unlike it was along Columbia River even to this day. And once again, I see what Russ is talking about with the video. And that was the group kind of as it ended. And toward the end there, Bob Martin, who's also on this call, he's the guy down in the middle. Bruce Harris, who is our long-term president, he has the yellow vest on. We lost him. He passed away a year ago on Easter weekend. And but most of the guys in this picture are still active in the club. So basically, this is what it ended up with. So nearly 45 years. It was December of 2022. I mean, credit to the BNSF, which gave us 18 months to get ready to depart. And we did not need all of that time, but we were able to get out by December of 2022. And then, of course, simultaneously, we're trying to figure out if we had a future at all and where that would be. So on to our next step, which is the Everett Railroad Heritage Association. This is the 1950s empire builder coming along the bluffs right along the water along Puget Sound. Credit to D. Voss. Of course, D had the fabulous Everett Monte Cristo Railroad, which is a museum piece in and of itself. Unfortunately, that met its demise, but not entirely, because this is the smelter, which D, I'm sure, will jump in to correct me, but was basically a product of the turn of the last century. And because there was mineral wealth in the Cascades, not a tremendous amount of it, not as much as the Rockefellers and other big moneyed interests from New York were hoping for. But this was gone in the mid 20s. We are basically representing the railroad as it was in the mid 50s. This would have been gone, but it is so historically significant because people think of what is Everett? Well, they make big airplanes there. True. That's been true since the mid 60s. What else did it do? How did it get started? Did it get started with timber? Yes, but it also got started with mineral wealth as well. And that was one of the reasons why Everett is named Everett, because Colby, who has streets named after him up there, was having a big highfalutin meeting, and they were putting together Everett, and they said, so what are we going to name this town? And they said, I don't know. Nobody knew. And then Colby's son, who's 9 years old, walked into the room, and somebody said, well, let's call it Everett. He's an earnest young man. So it's named after this then little boy who happened to be at the right place at the right time. So as you look back over the basic structure of Everett as a railroad town, and the more layers that we have peeled back, the more and more interesting it's become. And of course, now it's dominated by BNSF. But of course, the BNSF was made by the Great Northern, which was the dominant railroad in town, but not entirely. The NP had a significant role to play there, and by some measurements actually had more customers at times than did the GN. And the NP and the Milwaukee both. The Milwaukee was a significant player, but the third sort of place railroad there. The Everett Monte Cristo owned for a time by the NP, which didn't keep it, and then eventually became an independent railroad again called the Hartford and Eastern, and lasted not that much longer, and then that kind of went away. And the whole story of Monte Cristo and the Everett Monte Cristo Railroad is its own tale. So that is represented not entirely here, just really in terms of the smelter, but the GN and the NP and the Milwaukee will all be represented. And the Milwaukee Depot is still there. It's about a block from where our home is now. This is a building under construction. The taller building is actually Bond Street Station, which is mostly there. The tower is, but it was cut down to a one-story building. It hasn't hosted a passenger in a very long time. This is the Wood Station. So this was what, 1909. So this would have gone away not long after that, or was moved or something. If somebody knows, let us know. This is another historic building that we have under construction now. One of our guys is building. This is the warehouse or office building. This
Oh,
is
yeah.
not a small structure, and this thing has been moved 3 times already since it was built in 1923. It was over at Mill A, which was on Port Gardner Bay along the GN Main that's still there, south of the, I believe, south of the Bond Street station.
North of it.
North of it?
North
Okay,
of it,
north.
yeah.
I got my conscious is talking to me out the side of my left ear. And then was moved then to Mill B and is now, as the note says, it's become a coffee and whiskey bar. It's owned by the Port of Everett. Now it's on the Everett waterfront, um, kind of north of the Navy base in that commercial area. There's Mill A here, as the caption says, it was converted. This will be featured, obviously not full scale on the railroad, but it will be featured on the layout. Became a pulp mill in the mid-30s. And this is the big dog. This is Weyerhaeuser Mill B. And it was at one time considered the largest, by some folks, the largest sawmill in the world. What's interesting about it, we found a book called A Railroad Runs Through It, which is a very written from the point of view of people who used to work for the NP in Everett and Darrington and Arlington and those places. And the mill was switched by all three railroads at different times of the year. So a third of the year was switched by the GN, a third Milwaukee, and a third NP. So the office building we talked about is right here under the water tower. So you can see as big as that office building is, and you can go up there and see it right now. You can imagine just how large this entire complex was. And I was talking about Russ and the donation of one of JJ's his waterfront stuff. There was a tugboat in there, and the tugboat matches this almost. I have no idea what the colors of this are, but it's very, very close. The Monte Cristo Hotel is still in place. I don't know what it's doing now exactly. It seems to be sort of a halfway house or something, but it's still there. And that'll be, we're trying to build historically accurate buildings. We will fill in the portions that we have for downtown Everett. And then as more of these buildings are finished, then the stand-ins will go away. But you'll still get, and you saw some of those stand-in buildings in the first slide of this.
Well, that's Monte Cristo #3. Monte Cristo #2 was where the hospital is today. And Monte Cristo #1 was actually the second floor of a building that was along Puget Sound. So.
All right. Well, this would have been the one in the mid-50s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's #3.
Yeah. And then City Hall is an Art Deco style building that still exists, although the cars look a little newer. And you can see it in color now. And this is our current home. This is the front of this is one of the doors that enters our space. We're on a platform again, so when the trains go by, we can run out and get our fix. And this is the inside. When we first saw it, it was the baggage room for Greyhound. So the Everett station serves Amtrak, Sounder, commuter rail, and a lot of bus lines, Everett Transit, Sound Transit. And there's a big bus depot or whole bus terminal outside of our door. So a lot of this obviously it took months to happen, but the city cleaned all this out. There was another wall here that was removed that gave us more space. Behind me was an office, and to the right-hand side, you can barely see it. There's some chain link there. There was sort of this cage. There was even a safe bolted to the floor. So Greyhounds just changed up their business model, and I guess they're still serving the station, but they didn't keep this space. So that's where we are now. And yes, we are building a layout. So this is almost the same point of view that you saw in the last photo, if you want to do a little comparison. So this area here it goes to an internal doorway that goes off to Amtrak and some restrooms and stuff. And then there's more space down here but it's not big. I mean, the floor space is only about 3/4 of what we had in the old Swamp Creek, and there were certainly bigger clubs than that. As far as the track plan goes, there's 3 levels. The main level is Everett itself. So you got a downtown, it's the Milwaukee freight house. I can't remember, I can't see it quite, but this here, this is GN engine facility. The smelter will be up here. Delta Yard, which is the big yard, will be in this area, which is next to obviously a dramatically downsized look at Warehouse or Mill B on the Snohomish River. I don't know if you've seen the Columbia Gorge Club. Most of us have, but if you noticed on the Columbia Gorge Club, um, there is the steel bridge there, which is a bridge within a bridge that, comes up and then it goes up from there, and it operates. And one of our guys lived in Portland and was a member of that club for the better part of 20 years, built that. Well, now he is building Bridge 10, which is across the Snohomish River. So the Highway 99 runs through here, and there's a short sort of staging yard, and this is about the end of our property at the end of the picture, and that would be up toward Canada and Marysville. There's a lot of waterfront activity. Actually, in the day, there were the whole bunch of cattle pens here for exporting and apparently importing cattle and probably horses as well. The Everett GN station is here that you saw earlier, and there's canneries and there's other elements to the waterfront kind of all over the place. We also have a lower level, and the lower level is primarily, it's sort of staging with scenery. So what we're trying to do is build a museum. We're trying to show not that there's not just railroad tracks in Everett, but it's how does Everett fit in with the rest of the rail network in North America. Obviously, Canada's not very far away. You got 60 transcontinental trains a day, even today, that run that north line out of Seattle through Everett and east. And the NP and the Milwaukee both had their own lines that came into Everett, bridges and everything else. And there was an agreement, I don't remember when it was formed, but basically they were given trackage rights and to suspend with these waterlogged extensions they had coming into Everett and across other bridges and everything else. So that's the lower level. That will come up about this, where these tracks end here. And then we're going to get those first 2 levels kind of roughed in and then make the decision when to build the 3rd level. And maybe even a 4th sort of crown level that would just be a scenic thing that would run around sort of independent. You wouldn't drive a train up there from this, but that could be cool. And that's been done. Mike O'Connell did something on his O-scale layout. So you'd take a helix up here, you have Monroe, you have a nod to the town of Snohomish, and then you would come into Skycomish and you would go through the Cascade Tunnel, and there's a bit of a stump staging yard here for Wenatchee. And then if you want to see what it's going to look like, or what we hope it looks like, here's a 3D representation that one of our guys built. So there's a lot of railroad crammed into a not a very big space. And it may all be a disaster, I don't know, but we're having a good time so far. And we got a fair amount of folks that have signed up already. This is all part of the lower level that we're obviously starting with. Sort of portable, yeah. Well, who knows? We'll see let's how long our lease lasts. But the city's made a commitment to us. So here's one of our guys, Dan Henderson, who's been a real he's relatively new to the hobby, but he's the guy that did the any rail drawings, which we settled on a couple of years ago for the track plan. So I've already started laying track beyond where his left hand is, and we're doing micro engineering Code 80 Fleet 3 flex track, but we are hand building all the ties with fast track jigs. We are maintaining a 36-inch minimum mainline radius, and with all of our mainline turnouts being number 8 or greater, most of them number 8. There's some number 6s are the tightest, and they'll be on some industrial tracks and things like that. But even a number 6 is pretty generous. So we will be doing public shows and as part of our mission here. So that's what we're working on. So we were talking about some of the historic buildings. Jim Landers has been building the Weyerhaeuser office building. It's obviously not done. But it's getting there, and it's getting there faster than I can laser cut out pieces for it, like this lower skirting, this mid-level stuff, and I got to do another section for him up here that's completely different. This building is amazing because it was sort of like a sales catalog for all the stuff that Weyerhaeuser had built. And a lot of molding, and it didn't always match from one side to the other. I mean, they must have walked people around this building, God knows it rains enough, and showed them we can do this, we can do that, and it's sort of crazy. So, and they've done a pretty good restoration job on it. I haven't spent any time on the inside, but Jim Landers has. Here's another view of it. And he's been working on all the wood gutters lately, and there's turrets, there's an amazing chimney that we're going to try to 3D print. Still struggling with the 3D printing, which Dee has been able to help out on. And Dee, I'll be calling you in a few days more about that, or next week. But he's been able to help us out with some lessons, but we're still struggling on the 3D print stuff. One of the things that we did was to as we're designing the railroad, and what elements do we want, what elements don't we want, is a lot of us went to tour various other layouts. Columbia Gorge was one of them. These are our members that made this particular group. The guy on the left in the darker green Amtrak shirt, that is the owner of this particular layout. That's Bill Sorensen. He has a very large layout and a very large building in Seattle. You can obviously, if you think that's King Street Station behind you, you would be absolutely correct. And he's building the Great Northern from mile by mile from pretty much from Seattle to Stevens Pass. And he even has a lower level like we're building. But what's interesting about this lower level is you can comfortably run around there in an office chair, or like a dental stool or something like that. And that looks like that's going to work pretty well. It'll also be in the range of kids' hands, so we're going to have to work out something on that. If you want to contact us, I mean, we're continuing to look for some members as well. Here's our email address: Everett Railroad, RR Heritage Association, HA@gmail.com. I will leave this up in case anybody's interested, or if you know of anybody's interested, or just want to find out more about the layout or our level of insanity, let us know.